Metal Wolf Chaos isn't a great game, but among the small pantheon of games so bad they're good, it does have the dubious distinction of probably being the most fun of them to play. If you're the kind of weirdo who gets a kick out of games like The Quiet Man and Deadly Premonitions and Sonic 06, then being able to enjoy the whimsical charms of a good bad game that at least manages to nail some tried and true mecha shooter conventions is a hell of a welcome break. Reason being is that Metal Wolf Chaos is a product of the giant robot wheelhouse that was From Software's bread and butter circa the days of Armored Core 3. Certainly shorter, less complex, less feature-filled, glitchier, and finickier than any real Armored Core game from the time, so why am I bothering? Because Metal Wolf Chaos is absolutely one of the funniest games I have ever played in my life. And when this thing's competing for a so bad it's good honor, that's legit. That is what makes it all worthwhile.
Mr. President?
Okay, let's party! Welcome to the White House.
Yeah, you're the President of the United States and that giant fighting robot blowing up the visibly American iconography of military assets that are globally recognizable as what our tax dollars get spent on. Black Hawk helicopters and Humvees pour out with desert camo soldiers wearing big puffy ACH helmets, and they all get mowed down by the hundreds, so yeah, it might have still been a little too close to 9/11, probably more likely the Iraq War, that spooked publishers into refraining from releasing this in America. Though somehow I suspect that if they did release this game over here back then, it's less likely that it would have genuinely offended the troops and the war hawks for more than just 2 days of Fox News bickering than it would have launched as the sleeper hit cult classic it actually became. I, at least, probably would have loved this game and remembered it forever. I mean, this is the kind of game where you free the hostages by shooting them.
Some scientists were among the POWs you rescued. They were used to develop new weapons for the military. Way to go, Mr. President!
When the Microsoft Xbox launched in Japan in 2002, they had a hell of an uphill climb to make. A foreign video game console has never really taken off in Japan. Seriously, the Xbox One nowadays is so far barely pushing 100,000 units, and 15 years ago the OG Xbox had only sold 500,000 units in Japan over its entire lifetime. In Japan, the Xbox is often the subject of online mockery and the padding of discount bargain bins. So when Microsoft asked a Japanese studio like From Software to make a game appealing to Japanese gamers who were brave enough to buy an American console, they decided to jump straight into parody with it, going for a theme that would exaggerate American patriotism and the scandals, soundbites, and quirks popular enough to make it across the ocean and filter through a Japanese lens. And seeing the intersection of how these two cultures do comedy is fascinating.
Mr. President, the Alcatraz cannon just started to recharge.
I'm on the move. I'll smash it faster than a Florida recount.
In general, Japanese comedy does not do irony, sarcasm, or subtlety. But the act of playing Metal Wolf Chaos as an outsider is an act that indulges in all three. It's the irony of playing a Japanese game about their version of Americans as an American. There's some subtlety to appreciating the trivia behind its history and spotting all the weird cultural quirks to it, while also being sarcastic enough about it all to just play it for laughs. Metal Wolf Chaos was a rare piece of well-executed video game meta humor since day zero. The very console it's on, the context of its publishing deal, those are just as much part of the joke as the writing and voice acting are. And the wildest thing is that they actually did want to ship this to the States back then. But it's not just the politics and the demographic attitudes. There's the quality of the voice work and the translation to consider, and the business models of the time back then. 2005 was when shipping out to big box retail chains was the default option. Before digital stores, there was way more risk to putting out a silly game just for yucks. Boxing this up and shipping out millions through the official channels to Walmarts across the country, that would have had a fat chance in hell. But now I guess living inside of a nightmare means that some dreams still come true.
I feel like a mother hen here.
Okay, Mr. President.
So it's a happy accident that all this shtick might have worked better on us than them. The game's original Japanese release sold under expectations, but that didn't stop it from becoming an internet hit and then a collector's item and now a remastered re-release overseas. And hell, Devolver wasn't even that serious when they started tweeting about the idea of porting it over in the first place. What's intended as good-natured Japanese humor about foreign stereotypes turns into bizarre, exotic, potentially scary Japanese weirdness for the foreigners in question. From beginning to end, you just can't stop thinking, holy crap, they actually went through with this! In reference to everyone involved in this game's making.
The enemy force sends out over 1,000 citizens a day from Miami, trafficking them into overseas white slavery.
I was expecting a silly game, sure, but what I wasn't expecting was how thick the density of these gags really are. And they are all good. Every single line of dialogue is a delight to listen to. Every single one translated with the finesse of a bone saw, obviously handled by no one with an extensive knowledge of the English language. Every single one delivered by fully hamming up that stiff, slow, monotone voice acting that I have been told that Japanese vocal directors demand from foreigners. In 2019, it's also a stark reminder of the days when cutscenes and story beats were regarded as rewards for gameplay, because here they really, really are. Hearing this stuff, seeing the ridiculous places we go, experiencing the alien logic behind all this, it's like playing an entire game out of a Squirrel King fanfiction.
John Freeman got on his motorcycle and said, "It's time for me to live up to my family name and face full life consequences." So he had to go.
You enemy of the people, I, Richard Hawke, won't let you get away with it.
Character motivations, their logic, their personalities, it all just zigzags back and forth all over the place. This is what an Axe Cop game would be like. Why can't the industry take another stab at this with this level of production values? Just an 8-hour campaign with a story that is a complete stream of consciousness fever dream. But I know that if the concept of a comedy action game parodying American patriotism was done by the home team over here in America, it would come off way differently. There's an element of genuine earnestness to Metal Wolf Chaos that steps back from that parody, the stuff that turns the humor into exotic weirdness. Like the feeling that these mecha designs and the UI were being played straight. There's a thought that on some level this was an honest attempt at making something that looks cool to their audience. For another example, there's the soundtrack. This is the kind of funky, eclectic, jazzy mix of all sorts of conflicting genres that you rarely find outside of Sega's Dreamcast days. It's entirely inappropriate for the situation. A lot of menu music loops quickly and drowns out the dialogue, but a lot of it is actually good music.
Mr. President, how's the skydiving?
Not too bad.
San Francisco, occupied by Trinidad.
Come on, this track bangs harder than my forehead during the debates. And likewise, with regards to the gameplay, we're working with a 15-year-old game here that was already dated on release. It's not uncommon to spot some collision glitches here and there, the spots characters stand on, and the places you aim your gun always feel like they're only implications. The weapon select system is this wildly outdated idea that turns your shoot buttons into UI buttons, and that leaves you vulnerable, and yet it's executed fairly solidly for what it is. There's actually a real thrill to panicking through the controls of that weapon menu. There's a real punch to the gunplay. There's a satisfying catharsis to all the destruction that's had when playing with this idea of combining two different types of guns at the same time and dual wielding them for interesting mix and match results. Action is impactful thanks to some steady shaky cam, a ton of exploding destructible pieces, dodge bursting and air stomping that always feels good, and that trick that the original Perfect Dark and Fear games employed where your burst firing doesn't perfectly time up with your button presses, so it actually encourages you to just hold down both fire buttons and wave your cursor all over the screen and just forget about discretion. And yet, levels are filled with sticky trouble spots where a slight misstep will cause you a very fast and unpredictable death after minutes of otherwise easy gameplay. The difficulty curve is all over the place, with a straight linear upgrade system that's easy to ignore until the end of a level when a boss will suddenly seem like a bullet sponge, or a time limit will seem unbeatable until you go back and replay a level or two to grind some upgrade materials. It never felt impossibly hard, just inconsistently hard, frustratingly hard. It definitely felt like the outcome of a lot of boss fights was more dependent on how upgraded my weapons were rather than whether or not I was using them better. It certainly helps to know ahead of time what to dump your points into. My second playthrough looked nothing like the first because I hit those upgraded assault rifles and grenade launchers early. It's the kind of difficulty curve where explosions and gunshots do as much damage as they reasonably would up until you hit a boss and get the feeling you should be looking for a giant glowing weak point that's not actually there. Also, shouldn't we be hearing like a lot more sound effects right now?
And the reason is Richard Hawk am the last great American hero.
And that stuff may be less excusable now than it was in 2005, but what's been made better with age is its personality, its humor, and its presentation. The best thing about Metal Wolf Chaos is that it's impossible to take seriously, and that includes its faults. So why should you explore the history, the jokes, the eBay market prices, the behind-the-scenes stories, basically the entire internet subculture behind an above-average 15-year-old mecha game with frustrating bosses? Because you are the President of the United States of America.
I can't turn my back on a friend. And the reason is, I'm the President of the United States.